The town of Whisper Creek sat wedged between two low ridges of the Montana Territory, a place that had grown out of gold dust, whiskey, and sweat. There wasn't much left of its glory days, just a few leaning buildings, a crooked church bell that hadn't tolled in years, and a street where dust and gossip traveled faster than stagecoaches. And in that town lived Clara Belle Winters, a woman the townsfolk said carried the devil in her blood. She wasn't evil, not really, just proud, wild, and too beautiful for her own good. Her hair was aflame in the sunlight, and her eyes could pin a man harder than a rifle's aim. She didn't curtsy, didn't flatter, and didn't beg forgiveness for speaking her mind. That was enough to make her dangerous in a place where men liked their women silent. Her trouble began the day her father, Samuel Winters, passed. He'd been a prospector, half drunk on hope and half in debt to every soul within 50 miles. When he died, he left behind nothing but a shack, a few worn-out mining tools, and a daughter who refused to be anyone's charity. Clara tried to live honest, played piano in the saloon for tips, helped patch up drifters at the doctor's shed, even broke horses for the sheriff's deputy once. But folks whispered every time she walked by, said she was cursed, that her father's debts had poisoned her name. The men wanted her, the women despised her, and the town had decided she didn't belong. The last straw came one hot afternoon in July. Clara had been hauling water from the well when Tommy Greaves, the mayor's son, sauntered up, slick-haired and smug. "You could make life easier on yourself," he'd said, reaching out to touch her chin. She'd slapped him so hard his hat flew into the dust. "Touch me again and I'll lay you flatter than your pa's lies." Tommy's pride burned hotter than the sun that day. By nightfall he was telling everyone that Clara had gone wild, that she'd cursed him, that she was her father's daughter through and through. By morning, the gossip had turned into a verdict. Clara Winters was the town's problem. That night, in the back of the saloon where the lamplight turned whiskey into gold, the men of Whisper Creek gathered to decide what to do about her. The mayor's voice carried over the clink of bottles. "She's trouble, same as her father. We can't jail her, she's broken no law. We can't let her stay neither. She'll tear this place apart." A miner with soot still in his beard spat into a tin can. "There's one way. I seen him last week by the trading post, the Apache. Name's Taza. He's been camped near Devil's Ridge for months now." The name rolled around the room like a cold wind. Taza. He was half legend, half ghost, an Apache scout who had fought beside soldiers once, then vanished into the mountains when he'd had enough of white men's wars. Folks said he could track a hawk through the clouds, kill a deer at 100 yards, and move through a forest like smoke. "He don't come cheap," muttered the blacksmith. "What did we pay him?" "Whatever it takes," said the mayor. "If the Apache wants coin, give him coin. If he wants whiskey, give him a barrel. But he takes the girl away." The saloon fell silent. No one liked it, not truly, but no one spoke against it. Fear and shame have a way of mixing into silence. At dawn, a rider went out to Devil's Ridge with an offer. Taza met him by a fire of sagewood, his face unreadable, eyes dark as river stone. He listened to the messenger's nervous rambling, then looked past him toward the horizon where Whisper Creek sat under a haze of heat. "They want me to take their woman," he said quietly. "Not their woman," the rider corrected. "She ain't anyone's, but they're paying you good silver to take her off their hands." "She's a problem." Taza stirred the ashes with a stick. "A problem," he repeated. "You mean she's free?" The rider shifted uncomfortably. "Just say you'll take her." Taza looked up then, and something like a smile ghosted across his face. Not cruel, but knowing. "Tell them I'll come tonight." Evening fell hard and red over Whisper Creek. Clara stood outside the general store arguing again. "I told you I don't owe you a damn thing," she snapped at the shopkeeper. "You owe every decent soul in this town for your father's debts." He barked. "Either you pay or you get out." "Then I'll get out," she hissed, slamming down the last of her meager coins and walking into the street. Her boots kicked up dust as she walked, her pride holding her taller than her fear. That was when she saw him. He was sitting on a horse the color of night, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair tied with leather, his face shadowed by the setting sun. The town went silent as he rode in, the air thick with unease. The Apache. Clara had heard the whispers, stories of him fighting soldiers, of how he lived alone beyond the ridges, untouched by law or mercy. When his eyes met hers, Something in her chest stirred that she didn't recognize. Fear, maybe, but not the kind that made her want to run. "You're the one they call Clara Winters," he said, his English rough but steady. "And you're the man they paid to take me," she answered, chin lifted. He nodded once. "They want you gone. But I don't take orders from cowards, and then why are you here?" He dismounted, the movement slow, powerful. "Because I heard you were alone. And I do not leave people alone in a place that hates them." The silence between them stretched, heavy as thunderclouds. She studied him, trying to find mockery or pity in his face, but there was none. Only calm and something wild she couldn't name. "What happens now?" she asked finally. He looked toward the church, its bell still rusted and still. "We go there," he said. "We make it right." Her breath caught. "You mean to?" "Yes," he said simply. "Tonight." By the time the moon rose, the church doors creaked open. The preacher stood trembling at the sight of them, Clara in her worn dress, the Apache beside her, his eyes steady and certain. "Marry us," Taza said. The preacher hesitated, glancing at the mayor and his men gathered outside in disbelief. "But—" Taza laid a hand on the table, silver coins glinting in the lamplight. "Do it." And so he did. When it was done, Taza turned to her. "They paid me to take you away," he said. "But I take no woman I don't honor. You are my wife now, and the mountains will know your name." The townsfolk watched as he lifted her onto his horse and rode out under the pale light, her hair streaming behind her like fire in the wind. Whisper Creek was silent for once, stunned. Some said the Apache had bewitched her. Others said she had bewitched him. But as their figures disappeared into the ridges, one thing was certain. The town's problem had just become the Apache's bride. And though the people thought they'd rid themselves of her, they had no idea they'd just written the first line of a legend that would outlive them all. The sun was setting low behind the mountains when Taza and Clara Winters rode out of Whisper Creek. The town behind them burned gold in the dying light, every rooftop glinting like a memory she wanted to forget. The horse moved steady beneath them, its hooves thudding in rhythm with the pounding of her heart. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence was heavy, not empty, the kind that held more meaning than words could touch. At last, Clara looked over her shoulder, back at the shrinking speck of the town. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice small against the whispering wind. "I know," Taza replied without turning. "Then why?" He looked ahead, his gaze fixed on the trail winding into the dark hills. "Because they paid me to take you away, and I wanted them to see that I don't take what isn't given. Marriage makes it right," Clara frowned. "You think that makes it right? You don't even know me." "I know what I see," he said. "A woman who don't bow to men who don't deserve her." She fell quiet. That was more kindness than she'd heard from anyone in months. When the last light faded, they stopped by a creek where cottonwoods grew thick and tall. Taza built a small fire, his movements sure and quiet. Clara sat across from him, still wearing the same look she'd had since he'd spoken his vows. Part disbelief, part defiance. "You can rest," he said, handing her a piece of jerky. "I'm not tired." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense, then leaned back against a log and looked up at the stars. "You're afraid," he said softly. "I'm not," she snapped more quickly than she meant to. "Yes, you are," he said, still calm. "You think I'll treat you like they did. But I'm not from your town, Clara Winters." That made her pause. The fire cracked between them, the light dancing over his face. He looked carved out of the earth itself, strong, quiet, with a kind of patience that made her feel small and seen all at once. "You talk like you know me," she muttered. "I know loneliness," he said. "And I know pride." They walked the same road. She stared at him then, really stared, and for the first time saw the man beneath the legend. Not a savage, not a story whispered by frightened townsfolk, but a man who had known exile too. A man who had been cast out for being different, just like her. After they'd eaten, Taza took out a leather pouch and pulled from it a small piece of turquoise bound in cord. He handed it to her without a word. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up to the firelight. "Protection," he said. "My mother made it. She said no evil can follow the color of the sky." She stared at the little stone, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You shouldn't give me this," she said finally. "You don't even know if I believe in such things." "I don't need you to believe," he said. "It's enough that I do." She looked down, her fingers closing around the stone. "They told me you were dangerous," she murmured. He smiled faintly. They were right. But not to you. The fire crackled again, and for a long time they sat in silence. The night air grew cold, and Clara wrapped her shawl tighter. Taza rose and spread his blanket near the fire. You sleep, he said. I'll watch. Watch for what? Wolves, men, dreams, she gave a little laugh. I don't know which one's worse. Dreams, he said quietly. They come when you can't run. At dawn, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the creek running close by. Taza was kneeling near the fire, boiling water in a tin pot, his face calm and unreadable. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Do you always wake this early? She asked. Before the sun, he said. The world speaks loudest when men are still asleep. Clara studied him, curious. He wasn't like anyone she'd ever known. He didn't rush to fill silence with words, didn't look at her like something fragile or shameful. He just was, steady as the ground, sure as the dawn. They broke camp soon after, riding deeper into the wilderness. The land rose and fell around them, a quilt of rock and sage and sky. Once she caught him glancing back toward her, a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. What? She asked. You ride like a man, he said. She smirked. Is that supposed to be an insult? It's a compliment, he said. You don't hold fear in your hands. That made her laugh, a real laugh, not the brittle kind she used in town. The sound startled them both. By midday, they reached a high meadow where wildflowers grew thick and the air smelled of pine. Taza stopped, dismounted, and let the horse drink from a stream. You said you'd take me away, Clara said after a while. But where are we going? He looked toward the distant peaks. Home. You mean your people? They are gone, he said simply. Soldiers took them south years ago. The land is what's left. Something in his voice, quiet, resigned but not broken, made her chest ache. She dismounted and stood beside him. Then why stay? She asked. He turned to her. Because this land remembers, even when men forget. For a long moment they just stood there, the wind tugging at her hair, his eyes reflecting the endless sky. She felt small beside him, but safe, like she'd stepped out of the world she knew and into one that had been waiting for her all along. That night, the second since they'd left Whisper Creek, they camped beside a stand of pines. The air was clear, the stars so sharp they looked like they could cut. Clara sat close to the fire, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. They'll be talking about us, she said. Let them, Taza replied. You don't understand, she said. Those people, they'll twist it. They'll say I ran off with you, that I wanted it. He looked at her, his gaze steady. Didn't you? She blinked. What? Wanted freedom, a life that isn't theirs. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She'd spent so long fighting to be left alone that she hadn't realized what she truly wanted wasn't solitude. It was peace. And somehow, sitting here beside this man who had no reason to help her, she felt closer to it than ever before. You talk strange, she said after a while. You listen strange, he answered, smiling. She laughed, shaking her head. You're not like any man I've met. He met her eyes across the fire. Good. Later, as the fire burned low, Clara found herself watching him. The way the firelight moved over his face, the quiet power in the way he sat, like the land itself breathed through him. He noticed her gaze and tilted his head slightly. What? Nothing, she said quickly. Then after a moment, just trying to figure you out. He nodded slowly. And what do you see? She hesitated. A man who's not afraid of anything. He gave a quiet laugh, one that barely reached his eyes. Everyone fears something, Clara Winters. And what do you fear? He looked up at the stars, his voice low. Losing something before I know I have it. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed against the turquoise charm at her neck, and her heart beat faster, somewhere far behind them. Whisper Creek slept soundly, believing the problem was gone. But out here under the wide sky and the whispering pines, something was beginning. Something wild and tender that neither of them yet dared to name. The mountains rose before them like the bones of the earth, jagged, eternal, and wild. The farther they rode, the less the world resembled anything Clara had ever known. Gone were the fences and the narrow streets of Whisper Creek. Gone were the prying eyes, the gossiping tongues, the debts of her father's mistakes. Out here, there was only open sky and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, following the quiet man who had become her husband in a single night. Days passed in a blur of wilderness. They crossed pine forest where sunlight flickered like gold coins through the branches, rode along streams that glittered in the noonday light, and camped beneath skies so vast it made her dizzy to look at them. Taza spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. Short, true, and never wasted. "Why do you live out here?" she asked once as they rested near a river swollen with snowmelt. He didn't answer right away. He knelt to fill their canteens, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. "Because the land doesn't lie," he said finally. "Men do." She thought of the mayor's sneer, of the way the town had turned its back on her. "That's true enough," she said quietly. Taza glanced at her then, his eyes unreadable. "You learn fast." "Had to," she said, her lips twisting into a bitter smile. "The world don't hand women much choice." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Then maybe it's time it handed you peace." That evening they made camp in a high valley where the wind smelled of pine, and the moon rose clear and full over the peaks. Clara sat near the fire watching Taza skin a rabbit he'd trapped. His hands moved with calm precision, every motion practiced, patient. "You do that like you've done it your whole life," she said. "I have," he replied. "The mountain gives, but only to those who take with respect." She watched the firelight flicker over his face, over the sharp lines and quiet strength. "You really don't miss people?" she asked. "Your tribe?" He paused, his knife stilling. "Every day, but they are gone and I am still here, so I remember them through the land." Clara felt a pang in her chest. "That sounds lonely." He looked at her, his gaze steady but gentle. "It was," he said. "Until you." The words caught her off guard. She turned away quickly, staring into the fire, her throat tight. She wasn't used to kindness spoken so plain. The next morning they woke to gray clouds and the promise of rain. Taza tightened the packs, and they set off through a narrow pass where the rocks towered like sentinels on either side. Before long, the rain began, a cold, steady drizzle that soaked through her clothes. They found shelter beneath an overhang of stone, where a small fire sputtered weakly against the wind. Clara shivered, wrapping her shawl tighter, her teeth chattering. Without a word, Taza took off his blanket and draped it around her shoulders. She started to protest, but he cut her off with a look. "You'll get sick," he said simply, "and you won't. I've lived through worse." She wanted to argue, but the warmth of the blanket and the steadiness of his voice stopped her. "You always this stubborn?" she asked. He gave the faintest smile. "You married me. You tell me." That made her laugh despite herself. "I didn't have much say in that, remember?" "Neither did I," he said softly, "but I don't regret it." Something in his tone, low, certain, made her heart thump harder. When the storm passed, they pressed deeper into the hills. Days turned into weeks, each one marked by the quiet rhythm of survival. They built a small shelter near a ridge overlooking a valley rich with green. Clara helped gather firewood, learned to trap rabbits, and even tried her hand at fishing in the cold streams. At first, she fumbled, burned food, tore her skirts on brambles, cursed the rocky trails. But Taza never scolded. He'd watch, quiet as ever, and when she failed, he'd show her the way, patiently, wordlessly, as though time itself bent to his calm. "You learn quick," he said one morning after she managed to start a fire on her own. She smiled faintly, blowing on the flames. "Guess I had a good teacher." He gave a slow nod. "No. You had the will to live." That night, as the stars burned bright above the pines, Clara found herself thinking about what he'd said. She realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving for anyone else's sake. Not her father's, not the town's, not for appearances or debts. She was living because she wanted to, and somewhere in that realization was the beginning of love. But love in the wilderness isn't soft or easy. It's earned, like fire from flint. One afternoon, while gathering wood, Clara heard a noise, a sharp crack behind her. She turned and saw a bear lumbering out of the trees, its eyes fixed on her. She froze, heart hammering as the creature let out a low growl. Then a single shot rang out. The bear reared back, wounded but alive, and Taza was there, rifle in hand, eyes burning like stormlight. He moved between her and the beast without hesitation. Another shot and the bear collapsed, the forest going still around them. Clara stood trembling. He turned to her, his voice low but steady. "You're hurt?" She shook her head, her breath coming fast. "No, I didn't even see it until..." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her shoulder, grounding her. "You're safe," he said. That night she couldn't stop replaying it, the sound of the rifle, the sight of him standing between her and death. When he sat by the fire later, sharpening his knife, she moved beside him. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He looked up. "Yes, I did." She hesitated, then asked, "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you're mine to protect." For a moment neither breathed. Then he added, quieter, "And I don't mean what the town meant by it. Not property, not debt. You're mine because I chose you. Because you walked beside me when you could have turned back." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak. To tell him that for the first time in her life she felt wanted not for beauty or convenience, but for who she was. But the words tangled inside her. So she just nodded, and when he looked away she reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, one small, trembling hand finding a rough, calloused one, but it said more than words ever could. Weeks later, spring began to breathe over the mountains. Snow melted from the ridges and the streams sang louder. Their small cabin stood firm now, smoke curling from its chimney, the scent of pine smoke and stew filling the air. Clara stood outside one morning, the turquoise pendant he'd given her warm against her skin. She looked out at the endless sweep of valley below, at the hawks circling high, and felt something she hadn't known since childhood. Peace. Taza came up beside her, his presence quiet but sure. "You've changed," he said. She smiled. "You make that sound like a bad thing." "It's not," he said. "It means you've found where you belong." She turned to him, eyes bright in the morning light. "And where do you belong, Taza?" He looked out across the valley. "Where you are." That night, under the stars, Clara lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her. She thought of the woman she'd been, the girl the town called a curse, the one they'd paid to be rid of. That woman was gone now, swallowed up by the wild. In her place was someone new, stronger, freer, loved. And though she didn't say it aloud, she knew that somewhere between the mountains and the moonlight, between the danger and the quiet, her heart had found its home in the Apache who saved her. Spring had painted the valley in green and gold. The air smelled of pine and rain, the streams ran strong with melted snow, and the world felt new. Clara and Taza had built a rhythm to their days, quiet mornings by the fire, afternoons tending their small patch of earth, and evenings filled with the hum of cicadas and the low crackle of the hearth. The wilderness no longer frightened her. She moved through it as if it knew her name. Sometimes she caught herself humming without meaning to. Sometimes she'd glance up and see Taza watching her with that calm, steady gaze, and not like a man studying a prize, but like one trying to memorize something precious. "You're smiling again," he said one morning, handing her a wooden bowl of coffee brewed strong and black. "Maybe I forgot how to stop," she said, teasing. He smiled faintly. "Good, for weeks." It felt as though the world had finally let them be, but peace in the frontier never lasts. It started with a sound, the distant echo of hooves against stone. Clara was tending the fire when Taza stiffened beside her. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. "Riders," he said. She froze, the old chill of fear creeping back into her bones. "Out here?" He didn't answer. He just moved, silent, efficient, like part of the mountain itself. He took his rifle from the wall, checked the powder, then handed her a small revolver she hadn't seen since the night they left Whisper Creek. "Stay here," he said. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "If it's them, it is them," he said softly. "And they're not here to talk." By midday the riders appeared, 6 of them, their coats dusty, their faces hard from the ride. The one in front was the mayor himself, Elias Greaves, his fine hat tilted low, his mustache curling like a snake. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, drawing rein at the edge of the clearing. Didn't believe the stories till now. The wild girl and her Apache husband. Taza stood silent in front of the cabin, rifle in hand but not raised. Clara stepped up beside him despite his glance warning her back. The mayor's eyes slid over her like oil. "You've done well for yourself, Miss Winters," he said mockingly. "Or is it Mrs. Apache now?" Clara's jaw tightened. "You can turn around, Elias. There's nothing for you here." "Oh, there's plenty for me here," he said, dismounting. "Seems your dear departed father left a little land outside of town. Useless to most, but my men found silver veins running under it. Trouble is, it's still in your name, and we can't sell or mine it without your signature." Clara's stomach twisted. "You already took everything from him." And now you want to take what's left? It's business, he said with a shrug. You sign the papers and we'll leave you and your savage in peace. Taza's voice came low and even. She owes you nothing. The mayor turned his smirk toward him. Careful, friend. You may think that gun makes you a man, but around here it still don't make you white. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt Taza's hand brush hers, calm, steady. He didn't rise to it. He didn't have to. The quiet power in his stillness was enough to make the men behind the mayor shift uneasily in their saddles. I said, Taza repeated, she owes you nothing. The mayor's smile faltered. You'd best think this through. Whisper Creek doesn't forgive easy. You can't hide forever. Taza stepped closer, his gaze sharp as flint. I don't hide. Not from men who pay others to fight their battles. Something in his tone made the mayor back a half step before he could stop himself. You'll regret this, he muttered. You both will. They rode off, but Clara knew it wasn't over. For days afterward, the quiet of the valley felt different. Thinner, fragile. She and Taza went about their routines, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he scanned the horizon at dusk. One evening, she found him sitting alone near the stream, sharpening his knife. The sunset bled orange and purple across the water. They'll come back, she said quietly. Yes, he replied. Then we should leave. He looked up at her, his dark eyes steady. And run all our lives? You said once you were tired of running. She hesitated. I was. But I don't want to lose you, Taza. He reached over, taking her hand. You won't. The land will protect us. It always has, Clara wanted to believe him. But she'd seen what greed could make men do. The attack came 2 nights later. It started with fire, a streak of torchlight through the dark, landing against the cabin wall. Flames leapt, crackling loud in the night. Taza was already on his feet, grabbing his rifle. Clara threw water from the basin, coughing as smoke filled the air. Out the back, he shouted, forcing open the door. Gunfire cracked through the night. Flashes of light, shouts in the dark. The men had come back just as she feared, and this time they came to take everything. Taza fired twice, each shot clean and measured. A man screamed, fell. Another torch hit the roof. Clara stumbled outside, choking on the smoke, clutching the revolver he'd given her. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't the same woman who'd been thrown out of Whisper Creek. She aimed, fired once, and the man chasing them dropped. When the gunfire stopped, the night was quiet again, except for the sound of the cabin burning. Taza stood beside her, his chest heaving, smoke and firelight dancing across his face. One bullet had grazed his shoulder, blood dark against his skin. Clara turned to him, fear and fury warring in her heart. They'll keep coming, Taza. They'll never stop. He looked at her, then at the cabin collapsing in flame. Then we'll give them a story worth fearing. At dawn, they went back down the trail toward Whisper Creek. The town that had sent her away barely stirred when they rode in. Taza's arm was wrapped in cloth, his rifle across his lap. Clara rode beside him, her eyes hard, her face streaked with soot. The people whispered from the porches. The mayor came stumbling out of the saloon, his face pale. You can't be here. Oh, we are, Clara said coldly. And I'm here to end this. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the land deed the mayor wanted so badly, and held it over a lantern flame. The parchment curled, blackened, and turned to ash. Now it belongs to no one, she said. The mayor lunged forward, rage twisting his features, but Taza stepped between them, silent as ever, his presence enough to freeze the man where he stood. You thought you could buy her, Taza said quietly. You thought you could pay someone to make your problems disappear. But you paid me to take her away, and I did. You just didn't know what that meant. He leaned in closer, voice low and dangerous. You paid me to love her. The mayor's mouth opened, but no words came. The town watched as the Apache and the woman they'd cast out turned and rode away, side by side, disappearing once again into the horizon. That night, back in the mountains, they built a new fire, smaller, humbler, but warm. Clara rested her head against Taza's shoulder. You could have killed him, she said softly. Yes, he answered. Why didn't you? He looked into the flames. Because I already took what mattered most to him. What's that? He smiled faintly. His power. She smiled, curling closer, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked. Yes, he said. But not tonight. Above them, the stars burned fierce and bright. The town below would talk for years, about the night the Apache came back, about the woman they'd paid him to take away. But up in the wild, where no law reached and no gossip could spoil, they had carved something no man could touch, a love born of fire, freedom, and forgiveness. The snows came early that year. By the time the first frost crept down from the high ridges, Clara and Taza had built a new home deep within the mountains, farther from the town, closer to the heart of the land that had always protected him. It wasn't much at first. A cabin of pine and stone, smoke curling from the chimney, the sound of a nearby stream singing against the cold. But it was theirs. Every board had a story, every stone laid with care. The world beyond those peaks. The greed, the guns, the voices of judgment, and felt like another lifetime. For Clara, the silence no longer frightened her. She'd learned the rhythm of it, the way the wind spoke through the pines, the soft shuffle of deer in the brush, the low hum of fire in the hearth at night. Sometimes, when Taza was gone hunting, she'd walk to the edge of the ridge where the world spread wide beneath her. The sky looked endless. The same sky that had once terrified her now felt like home. The months passed quietly. In that wild solitude, something began to grow between them. Slow, steady, unspoken but deep. Clara had thought love was a thing that came with words, with promises whispered under the moon. But Taza loved differently. He spoke through action, the warmth of his hands as he fixed the roof, the care in the way he brushed snow from her hair, the way his eyes softened when he watched her laugh. One evening, as the firelight flickered across his face, she finally said it aloud. "You never told me why you married me that night," she said, her voice almost shy. Taza looked up from where he sat, carving a small wooden figure. "You think I had a reason?" "Most men do," she teased. He smiled faintly, setting the knife down. "I didn't marry you because they paid me. I married you because the first time I saw you standing there in that cold street, you looked like something the world was trying to break, and I wanted to be the one place it couldn't." Clara's throat tightened. "And now?" "Now," he said, leaning closer, his voice low, "the world doesn't stand a chance." She laughed through the tears that filled her eyes, and the sound carried out into the night, clear, bright, alive. That winter was hard. The mountains turned white and still, and the snow piled high against the cabin walls. But they endured, together. When food ran short, Taza taught her to set snares, to track by faint prints in the snow. When storms cut them off for days, they read from the few old books Clara had brought, her voice soft against the roar of the wind. And when the silence grew too heavy, he would hum, low, melodic songs in his own tongue, songs that seemed older than the mountains themselves. She asked him once what they meant. He said, "They're songs for the living, for those who made it through the fire." Clara smiled. "Then sing them often." By spring she felt something new, a flutter deep inside, a warmth that made her laugh for no reason. She waited a while before telling him, unsure if he would understand. But the moment she took his hand and placed it over her belly, the understanding came without words. Taza's eyes widened, not with fear but wonder. "Our child," he whispered. She nodded, tears glistening. "Our child." He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at her, then at the mountains around them, as if silently thanking the spirits of the land. Then he said quietly, "The world tried to take everything from us. Now we'll give it something back." The months that followed were full of quiet joy and gentle work. Taza built a cradle from cedar, carving symbols into its sides, eagles, rivers, stars. Clara sewed tiny clothes by firelight, her fingers trembling as she imagined small hands filling them. But as her belly grew, so did her thoughts of the town below, of the people who had cast her out, and how easily they might have destroyed something beautiful. Sometimes at night she wondered aloud, "Do you think they ever talk about us?" Taza looked up from the fire. "They do," he said, "but their words don't reach this far. She smiled. Good. I'd rather the wind carry our story than their tongues. And it did. The hunters, trappers, and travelers who passed through those ranges began to tell tales of the Apache and the white woman who lived in the high country, who built a life where no one else dared, who loved each other as fiercely as the mountains themselves. The child was born on a summer night. The air smelled of rain and pine, the sky split open by lightning far to the south. Taza knelt beside Clara, his hand gripping hers as she labored through the pain, his voice a steady murmur of strength. When the cry finally came, sharp, small, and alive, he felt something deep inside him break and mend all at once. Clara held the baby close, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. "He's perfect," she whispered. Taza touched the child's cheek, his eyes wet. "We'll name him Nakai," he said softly. "The one who walks between worlds." She smiled through tears. Like his parents. Years rolled by. The cabin became a home filled with laughter and the soft echo of tiny footsteps. Taza taught Nakai how to track, how to listen to the forest, how to move like shadow. Clara taught him to read, to speak both English and Apache, to understand the hearts of people as much as the land. And in the quiet of those evenings, when the sun dipped low and the firelight warmed their faces, they often spoke of the life they'd built, of how two souls from different worlds found each other where neither was meant to survive. Taza would say, "The mountain chose us." And Clara would reply, smiling, "No, we chose it." As the years passed, the story of their love became legend. Travelers who wandered into those ranges would sometimes glimpse smoke curling from a far-off ridge and whisper, "That's their place." Some said the woman had hair like gold and eyes that could calm storms. Some said the Apache could track a man by the sound of his heartbeat. But all agreed on one thing, that they'd found something wilder and stronger than any law or border, a love untamed by the world that tried to bury it. And when time finally caught up to them, it did so gently. Clara, old and gray but still smiling, would sit outside the cabin, watching the sun set over the valley. Nakai, now a grown man, would sit beside her, his eyes the same dark calm as his father's. "Tell me again," he'd ask, "how you and father met." She would smile, looking toward the horizon where the sky bled gold and rose. "Your father was paid to take me away," she'd say softly, "and instead, he brought me home." When the seasons turned and both were gone, the cabin still stood. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying their laughter, their words, their fire. And those who passed by that mountain swore that on quiet nights, when the stars burned low, you could still see two shadows by the fire, a woman and a man sitting side by side, watching over the land that had given them everything, a love not bought, not bargained, but born wild and free.